when people reference bipolar or use that term, I find it's a very shallow understanding of, or even not an understanding of what bipolar really is, right? They just whether it's on the news, like, this celebrity's gone bipolar, or like the weather, or any host of things. It's just this reference to this erraticness, So so that's why it's important, as somebody, me being somebody diagnosed with bipolar and over 25 years ago now, it's important for me to educate people on what it is. It's just multifaceted and it affects people differently. And, there's a lot of, it can be a devastating illness, right? But there's also human beings behind this illness. And there's been a lot of creative people, a lot of professional people, successful people. It's also all sorts of people that have gone through bipolar. So I think it's a matter of humanizing it and understanding that it's like bipolar is just like other illnesses, and it can't be encapsulated in like a soundbite, For me, bipolar is really different today than what it was when I was first diagnosed with it back in 1997. Yeah. It's, I still have struggles, but it's night and day. So if I start from back then, I was diagnosed after having a manic episode, my first manic episode, when I was in Egypt, after 4 years of really difficult times in elementary and high school, grade 7, 8, 9, 10. Mm-hmm. And so before that, I was seeing a psychiatrist for about a year, just, I guess, coming out of just that environmental landscape where I was just starting to feel depressed and anxious like anybody would. Mm-hmm. And then my psychiatrist, who's also Egyptian, he recommended, why don't you go take a trip abroad? And that was really life-changing at the time. And it was my first time going abroad back home to my relatives for like 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. So just by the end of it, I was just feeling so much belonging and love and affection from my relatives, and feeling what I hadn't felt for years, right? And then this turned into the last 5 days that I was there. I think I hadn't slept. I was talking. I wanted to do shopping and buy stuff, and then come back and sell it in Canada and stuff, and just saying, I guess, interesting things, to my relatives, to other people, and just and then I don't know how I got back to Canada, because I was like racing thoughts, and I almost missed the connection in Paris to come back to Canada. And I remember vaguely talking to the stewardess and the pilots and the people somehow I got to talk to the pilot, I think. And in the airport, I guess the word was out that I was sick or something, because my name was on the intercom, and I guess they brought me out to the plane somehow. This is all somewhat vague. In my memory. And then I came back to Canada, and just this I just felt really high, and really like I had figured everything out, so it was fun, sort of, and it was just something really exhilarating. But then when I came to see the doctor, I came, and my dad took me to the doctor, and then I was, eventually taken to CHIO, and I was admitted in the hospital, and that's a whole other story. I was there for 6 weeks. And at first, and even weeks into it, I didn't really understand why. I had gone through a difficult time for the last several years, and finally I felt good. And then now I was being told I have this illness and I have to stay in the hospital until I get well and all of these things. And it was just very confusing for a 17-year-old. It just feels really like a really intense high feeling that can't really be described in everyday language, I guess. So what I remember from there is just, yeah, I mean, it was like, I cracked the code on what it means to be alive and what it means to have, I could solve the world's problems, or just these illusions of grandeur that I had, right? Later on, when I that was like the highest episode that I ever had, the first one. There's been other ones since then in the years following, but because I'd been through the first one and I could tell the signs, I sometimes could know that I'm going somewhere that isn't normal, yeah. But it's, talking about being productive, there's another state called hypomania, and that's really can feel really good as well, but it's kind of a controlled good. And I actually felt like I had that for almost a year when I was 20 to 21, and I had stopped taking my medication that year. And that went well for a year, and then when it didn't go well, I crashed back down. But I think in a way, I needed to try not taking medications to know that I needed to take medications. Yeah. I started taking medication when I was 16 I guess I was seeing the psychiatrist for, I guess he was calling it general depression or something like that at the time. So I was taking a low dose of something. Yeah, I guess the issue was, like, especially after my diagnosis of bipolar, the doctor, the psychiatrist has this big book of all these different medications, and I was seeing him regularly, and it seems like every week that I was coming in, he was like, okay, let's try this one instead. And I think from what I believe that bipolar in general can be very hard to find the right mix of medication, from what I recall, to really balance things out. So it took many years of kind of trial and error for me to find a mix of medication that worked for me. And I think it only started working really for me in a big way when I added to the mix other coping strategies and other management and other things that helped me, like turning to my faith more in my early 20s, and later on with personal development and stuff like that. So these were all things that really, I think medication can be part of the solution, but it's often not going to be the complete solution. Yeah, medications it's really, I think, unfair for people to judge you for whether you want to take your medication or not, because it's not that simple. Because it's like, I can remember times in my life where it was like, okay, I'm not feeling terribly low and I'm not going high, but what is this life that I'm living? I'm just kind of flatlined or something, and I'm not feeling really alive, so what's the point, right? That type of feeling. Also, there's side effects that can happen, like grogginess or all sorts of side effects, and sometimes you take one medication and then you have to take another medication for the side effects of the first medication. So you have like a whole pouch of medications to counteract each other, and you don't know what the long-term effects of all these medications are. Even now, for most of the past 20 plus years, I've been taking medication, and I don't think anybody really knows how it's going to affect me or other people over the long term, because it's, I don't think anybody can really say that. So I was hospitalized 3 times, once in 1997 and I was like, that was for 6 weeks, and then once in 2005 for 3 weeks, and then I had a quick stay in 2010 for 6 days, and then straight into a college program on the 7th day. Yeah. Yeah, I guess, the first time, there was times when I just felt like I was being held, um, being held in like a jail, or I'm just like for no fault of my own, right? And I have I have a copy of the letter that I wrote to the head psychiatrist or whatever. I'm a good person. Why are you putting me in jail? And then she wrote back something. She's like, you're getting better, but you still need to get much better before you can go to school or work and stuff like that. So the first time was, I guess it was confusing because I didn't know what bipolar was, and I was all of a sudden diagnosed, and I was in there, and I was like, well, okay, like, I had some tough times, and now I'm feeling better, and now I'm in the hospital, right? And then, but yeah, I was still, I guess, also like because I had my experience in the last few years was a bit, trying to fit in with friends that I didn't feel like I was fitting in with. I was just like outgoing at the hospital and trying to make friends and just there was sometimes there, like later on, I don't know if it was during my stay or after in the day evening program, there'd be outings that you'd go with the people that had been discharged but now are in the ongoing program, right? But yeah, and that's when I really started expressing myself creatively as well, through poetry. And I so we had like I guess psychotherapy sessions with like maybe two or three of us, with a psychiatrist, and I just started finding a way to just, before I would go in there, I would like write something creatively and then share that in the group of how I was feeling, and then that would be a running theme for me up until today. First time I was hospitalized, like I said, I was 17. I I had a belief in God, Allah, and Islam, but I wasn't. I'd have to say that I wasn't like fully practicing in terms of 5-time prayers and other things, right? So I don't remember completely having a problem with that so much. But like I might have said, it's like that's a long time ago, and there's a lot of like details that are a bit foggy for me. I can just remember certain things. But yeah, but later on in being, yeah, later on, I didn't really have too much trouble with it, to be honest. I guess I was fortunate. Um, I don't think anybody really gave me a problem if I was praying or this or that later on. Um, but yeah, I mean, the last time I was hospitalized, it was I was it was a brief time, but that was the first time that I really started having like paranoia, and even at that time in the hospital, I thought that. You know, I thought that like CSIS was watching me and stuff like that, and people were spying on me. And even after I got discharged, yeah, for like weeks or over a month, I started going to a college program, but I was still, the first day that I was there, I thought the international students were writing notes about me and stuff like that. Yeah, I don't know if that was like, because I haven't really had that much after, but like that was the first time that I really had that type of paranoia. I honestly don't know if where the paranoia came from. Yeah, I think there might have been a lot of environmental things going on in the media. That was 2010.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, 2010. So that was there was yeah. Speaking of that, like it's a fact that like that CSIS did call me before. Like I started when I was like 25, 26, starting to go to Islamic seminars, like specifically from El Maghrib. And there was like one time I got a call from CSIS, and they didn't say it was about me specifically. They said they wanted to talk to me about something that happened at a seminar, and that just kind of freaked me out. And yeah, it just kind of threw me off. And later on, she called me again, and then I remember meeting up with her in Tim Hortons or something like that, But the first time I told family about it, but I got through that. And then it's interesting, like later on, I think this was 2016 or 17, I was involved in more projects and stuff and doing some video casts and podcasts and stuff. So I was talking about faith and mental health, and by that time I had gotten more into advocacy. So I was talking about some things in more of a positive light and how to look at things. And then I got a call from CSIS again from another lady. I think she was half Arabic or something like that. And then she just like, she just wanted to talk to me, and she ended up coming and bringing some Tim Hortons and stuff like that at where I was. And she was interested for some insights from me about, she's like, I never heard anybody really talk about mental health and Islam in the way that you're talking about it. And maybe some of what you share can help me with what I'm doing or whatever, But the conversation didn't really carry on from there. I didn't work with them or anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand the times that we're living in, the culture that we're living in, the news events, all of these things, as minorities, as Muslims, as different racial identities, me as an Arab Canadian and all of this stuff. So yeah, I mean, if you have that in the back of your mind, like several years earlier, and then something else happens, or you're just, during, I think maybe 2017, and maybe I remember years before, when the Conservatives were in power, and specifically Stephen Harper, I just really, for the first time, I felt really not as welcome as a citizen in Canada, from the government, from looking at the government and the language that they were using and all of these things. Not that necessarily on a one-to-one level with other people that it was filtering down to me, but just that, just watching TV and just the sense and just the election outcomes and all of that stuff really eroded some of that sense of belonging. I guess it's the environment that we live in affects how we feel, and it can exasperate what's going on inside our minds, Yeah, so it seems like mental health, people talking about mental health awareness, seems like a fad that comes and goes, and it's certain days, certain weeks, you'll hear people, on social media or on television talking about it, but it's not in our everyday. It doesn't match the everyday experience of somebody going through a mental illness, right? And now it's kind of, when people talk about mental health, anybody says, "Oh, I'm having a mental health day" or something, but what does that mean, really? Is it a chronic mental illness that this person has, or is it just balancing their situational sadness? Or not to downplay anybody's experiences, because we all get burnt out, stressed, and all of these things. But yeah, it's confusing, and it even, I guess it filters down to me and how I speak. Sometimes I won't be as precise in what I'm talking about, and because that's kind of the landscape of the language that people are using, so then I'll talk about mental health as well and not be as precise sometimes when I should just be mentioning mental illness or mentioning bipolar or mentioning anxiety disorders. I guess it's also can feel like a safer and sanitized way of saying things like, oh, okay, you know, you're having a mental health day or mental health awareness, you're getting on the bandwagon of sharing with people. And I think that definitely bipolar is kind of like the wild card of mental illness, you know? I mean, there's other, like there's schizophrenia as well that people can misunderstand and be scared of as well. But yeah, bipolar, even when, you know, like, I think like anxiety is more relatable to most people because everybody can have anxiety. There's anxiety, but anxiety, there's disorders. So there's like really acute anxiety, but still there's a frame of reference for people to connect to it, right? But you know, bipolar people don't understand what it is. So it's just been kind of caricatured. And, you know, there's people in the media or celebrities that, you know, sometimes will embrace that title. Like, you know, there was Charlie Sheen, and then there was, you know, Kanye West and other people, you know, I'm bipolar and this and that. So then people will kind of supplant that and put it onto other people, right? Yeah, I mean, I think in some circles, you know, they're like, you know, there are people advocating that have the illness themselves, and that's why I'm being public in this project, right? To talk about, you know, to be heard and to offer my voice as somebody with a lived experience with bipolar, and also that it's not uniform across all of. Like it'll affect everybody differently, right? You know, there's very high functioning people that might have a diagnosis with bipolar and they don't really even, you know, I know of this, they don't even really think that they have it, you know, on a day to day. For me, it was, you know, there was other elements that exacerbated things at certain years of my life, right? So, you know, all to say that, yeah, I mean, yeah. So the importance of people sharing their stories and also sharing their struggles and sharing their successes as well. So I feel really fortunate in my life, where I was and where I've come to, because yes, I have crappy days, and yes, I am frustrated with not reaching some of my goals, and yes, there's still habits that sometimes it's hard to identify if it's like my fault or if it's the mental illness as well. But it's still much different than when I would like wish or pray, you know, if life is good for me, let me live, and God, if the death is better for me, let me die, you know, and just pacing in my own skin, pacing in my room, and being really anxious. So, yeah, I think it is very important because, yeah, I mean, in the Muslim community, you know, I've been at I've been places where people have talked about somebody specifically having a mental illness or having bipolar, and they just see the behavior in an episode or something, and then that just kind of encapsulates that person, right? But it's important for us in our communities to people living with the mental illness to speak about it, if they're comfortable doing that. Like I don't want to make a mistake to say that, you know, somebody dealing with a mental illness and they already have enough on their plate, it's not their job to kind of like advocate if they're not in a space to do that. But for other people, it is important. Yeah, I guess in my life with bipolar, I wouldn't say I felt like physically in danger, but I felt worried and also anxious and worried about negative outcomes in terms of employment, career. Also, you know, like get to a certain age, you want to get married, and you wonder, okay, you're getting to know a person, okay, you're not gonna like, when you first meet them, I'm bipolar, and maybe save that for the second meeting, or who knows when, but you have to share that eventually, right? I felt paranoid that people were looking at me in a way that I might be, because of what's going on, what's been going on in the news for years, and certain years more than others, about Muslim men and Arabs and things like that. It's at times, certain times, not all the time, it's made me feel a bit paranoid about myself, and what are, goes into like, what are people thinking about me? Like, are they looking at me in a certain way or in a certain light and stuff like that? I think that's even with some Muslims without a mental illness, they, especially if they're in certain settings, like at the airport, or if they're taking a nice vacation in Quebec and they have to stop at the convenience store or something like that, they might start, people that don't see a Muslim, or if they're with like, their a relative that's wearing a hijab and you're all together and stuff like that. I mean, sometimes, there might be nothing to it, but it's still, we internalize what we see on the news, and the polls and the online hate and the comments and all of these things can conflate into one thing, and it can pop up at any time, pop up to the surface and affect how we feel and see ourselves. And sometimes it can be not based on it. Maybe it's not based on anything, but it's still our reality in a way. When it comes to suicidal thoughts, or the willingness to live, or it's been, for most of my experience, especially during the dark times, sometimes I would like wish that I was dead, right? Or like, at a certain point, like walking near my house, like when I was a teenager, like go over the bridge and just looking down, But I was fortunate, even at the time when I wasn't as fully practicing, I always had this belief in God, and that was kind of the thing stopping me from seriously considering it, from seriously, ever coming to a point where I wanted to make a plan to around suicide. But it in a way, it was frustrating to me as well, because it's like my belief system requires me not to go there, and sometimes you have this feeling where it's like, well, you're kind of trapped in between a rock and a hard place, right? So it's, but yeah, I mean, I'm fortunate that I've gotten through those times, but I've definitely, been to those places where I didn't want to live anymore. Mm-hmm. Of course, I've been fortunate in many ways to have that family support and have resources. I mean, even though it hasn't been there's been misunderstanding from my family, and still like, okay, just like go play a sport and you'll feel everything will be cured. But no, overall, I've had the support, and especially when I was in low periods or high periods, they right away would address it and take me to seek guidance, seek treatment, all of these things, right? Yeah, that's not like I've talked with people, and people who have relatives or people who have family members who they're in the Muslim community, where they don't want to acknowledge that their son or daughter might have a mental illness. Or on the other spectrum, they'll say that they're affected by the jinn, possession or something like this. So it can be doubly hard for what is that person supposed to do, right? So it's really, I'm fortunate I haven't had that experience, but I've heard about it and I've talked with multiple people about it, and I just think that we shouldn't judge anybody who had a mental illness, and heartbreaking that they would take their own life, but also Allah talks about if somebody is I don't know exact wording, but if somebody is not thinking in a, I guess, fully sane way, then I don't think they can be take into account for something that they do when they're not thinking in a clear-sighted way, But at the end of the day, it's like I have enough to worry about in my own life to judge other people. I'll never judge other people for, they must have been in such a hard place for that to happen, right? It's very difficult to get help with mental health treatment or services right now. I know, I had a friend who was really having anxious thoughts and was really going through a rough time, and the only way that they could see somebody is to go to emergency, right? And then they can see somebody and hopefully they can refer them maybe a month down the line or a couple of weeks to maybe see a psychiatrist and then see if they can take them on or something like that. But it's very difficult. There's a shortage from what I know, of psychiatrists. It's very hard to find one. There's waiting lists. And yeah, it's so, and and for some people it's harder than other people as well. So yeah, it's frustrating because the government's talked about the need for mental health resources, and it's become fashionable almost to talk about let's treat mental health, but the reality is that it's very difficult to find that help often. I think that definitely we have to, if we don't do it, if we don't advocate for mental health supporting people with mental illnesses, then who's going to do it for us, right? So I think it falls upon, it's like for me personally, I feel like a responsibility to do what I can. I don't know, if what I'm doing or sometimes is going to change the world, but I do know that when I've talked about these things, it's affected people. People have come and spoken to me, even at one of my, at my job once, because I had a friend on social media. He wasn't from the Muslim community, but I talked about bipolar, and then he reached out to me and he's like, I've never, thanks so much for talking about that. It really moved me, and nothing really moves me. So I think that nobody has it's hard to find a magic bullet for this, or a magic solution that's going to solve all these problems. But I think there is validity to the idea of having that conversation, right? Especially in faith communities, especially from our experience in the Muslim community, having those conversations and hearing from people with lived experiences, right? So whether it's, sometimes when something bad happens, that's when all of a sudden it'll pop up. So I remember, because I've been part of the entrepreneurial community in Ottawa at times. A few years ago, there was somebody well known that took their life. And I think, I didn't know him personally, but then, I went to an event that he was known to go to, or was part of the organizers of, and, they were speaking about this, and And then other people would, there was one or two people that got up and spoke about their own experiences. So each time that I'm in a space, whether it's a Muslim or a non-Muslim, that comes up and speaks about their lived experience, it gives me more permission, I feel, to speak about it myself, and it also gives me that connection. So that's where I'm not trained as a mental health professional, I'm not a doctor, but I do have a lived experience with bipolar and generalized anxiety. I do have my experience, and I want to apologize for speaking about it, and I will continue to do so. And for me, I don't feel like I have a choice not to.